Hello dear friends, I've just had a good chuckle. I started off this video and filmed for a couple of minutes and realized that I actually hadn't even switched the camera on. So welcome, thank you for joining me today, and we'll start again. And I'm going to be showing you today how to work with this very thin, almost aluminium foil that you get from the hardware store. This particular brand is called Easy Tape, and it is a thin tape that comes with an adhesive backing, and they use it quite often in building where they're sealing the edges of flashing, two double joints, and they just fill those corner bits. It is quite strong, and yeah, I discovered it by default back home because my brain kind of goes, oh, I wonder what I can do with that. And so I bought a roll. Needless to say, this huge roll is far more than I'll probably need in my lifetime, but it wasn't expensive, so that's not the end of the world. So I have a piece here of, it's 160 grams recycled card. You could use any card, even scrap card which you don't use and you don't like is also good to work on. And when you flip your foil tape over, you'll notice sometimes that it doesn't look wonderful on the edges. You could use a bone folder, or you could use a store card just to smooth that out. Having said that, it's not really going to matter that much, because when we turn it over and we take the backing off here, you're going to find that it's going to wrinkle and kink a little bit in any case. Now, I don't have very much in the way of nails, so I might even get a craft knife just to flick this open. It's a bit like working with napkins. You know, you find sometimes it's a little bit hard to get the top off. So we're going to just get this started somehow or other. There we go. Got a little bit opening there. It should come through. Yeah, and you can see both films are really, really thin. This is going to start to curl and kink and stick to everything. Don't panic. That's going to be fine in the end. Try and keep it as flat as possible, but you will see that it is picking up this little marks as it goes along. Right, so I'm going to try and lay my corners down nice and easily. You'll notice that I've cut this slightly bigger than what I need, and by the way I'm battling to get it off my fingers, you'll notice that it's really sticky. And I'm going to start by laying my card on one edge, trying to make sure that I've got equidistant space on either side, but if I haven't, it's not serious, because that's why I've cut it a little bit wider. And then I'm just going to take the side of my bone folder and just gently rub this down so that this is nice and flat. And for those of you who are my generation and maybe a little bit older, you'll remember having to cover school books with contact paper, and this is pretty similar. This bone folder is the only one I could find. Now I've got a plastic one somewhere which would be better, but this is picking up a little bit of a grain. But for one of the projects that I'm going to be doing today, I'm not worried. So you'll see that I'm kind of making this swirly pattern using the grain of the bone folder, but bone folders essentially shouldn't have this pattern, but I'm just going to work it to my advantage. So you want to make sure that that's nice and sealed. Rub down nicely along the edges. All right, now I'm going to grab this, flip it over, and I'm just going to trim down some of the bulk on all sides. Okay, so I'm going to be making a series of focal points for the covers of journals, and I'm not covering the back of these, but you could obviously, once you folded the edges over, put some journal card on there or some different color papers so that you could actually have a colored background. I'm going to cut little triangles off at the corners of my board, but make sure that you don't go right to the edge, because you don't want the corners of your cardboard poking through. Right, and now I'm going to start with the short edges lifting this up, I'm going to use my bone folder just to really press the edge of the card, of the tape up against the card, and then working from the center outwards, I'm going to just flatten it. I'm going to do the same with the opposite side. Place it down, work from the center outwards. That's it. And both the long edges as well. How's your week been so far? We've had a really hot week here. There were a couple of things I thought when I first moved to the UK. I thought, oh good, we won't have load shedding, which is when the government cuts your power to your house sometimes several times a day for a couple of hours a day because the national grid can't cope. I won't have to deal with drought anymore, and I will never have to see another eco-brick in my life. And if those of you don't know what an eco-brick is, I'll pop a video up so that you can have a look at. But when I landed here, we not only had a year where were potentially hosepipe bans because of the drought, but we also had the threat of maybe having to have power cuts, which was remarkable. And I was faced at work with loads of eco-bricks. So there we go. Right, so I have my base prepared, and I've got quite a few others done. I've just done a whole lot of different sizes. Now we'll get on to the fun part and see what we can make with them. So my first idea is really simple. I've simply taken my foil and I've run it through on an embossing plate to emboss it. And now I'm actually going to stick a piece of card which has been covered with fabric that I stamped on. And I did a video on how to stamp on fabric a little while ago. I've used some double-sided tape here to be able to just secure things down, and I've got 4 nice strong strips because the surface that I'm sticking onto, because it is embossed, is not a flat surface, so my adhesive is not going to come in contact with every part of it. Eat the knife again. So I just wanted to make sure that I had really strong adhesive for this. You could of course use a nice strong glue as well, a liquid glue. That would be fine. And I'm keeping these focal points quite light. I just feel in my life at the moment I need things bright and a little bit lighter, not quite as grungy as some of the work I've done in the past. So I'm just going to center this onto here. If you wanted to, you could always have inked the edges of that, and your inks from your distressing pads would work as well, and you can trim down any excess of this as well. So that's your first idea, just using an embossing plate to emboss your foil and carry on. Next, I'd like to show you what you could do with some of your little die cut pieces, just to give them a slightly different look. So quite often you have dies, and when you're cutting them you get all these like little random bits out and you're not too sure what you want to do with them. So I'm going to start off with one of them that actually just says specimen. I'm going to just trim this straighter because obviously my card is not great in terms of being straight here, and I'm just going to neaten off the edges. Now I'm going to cut a strip of my foil tape here so that it's just a little bit wider than what I need, just so that I've got wiggle room, and slide it to the edge so that I don't have too much. Now I'm going to need to peel that off just to separate these two layers. There we go. And this is quite a nice way just to give a sort of a metal feel to a piece of cardboard where you don't actually have anything metallic. Oopsie. There we go. So when you're working with anything that has got numbers or letters, you have to make sure first of all that you turn it to face forward so that you get it in the right direction, and then you want to place it face downwards, because obviously once you turn the foil over you want the wording or the numbers to be in the right direction. I've done that now, so I'm going to again just trim off some of the excess. I've got very thin little edges here, so I don't want a lot of bulk coming over the back, just because it'll make it thick and uneven, not because we're going to see it. And then I'm going to turn it over just as I did with the first lot. So that process is pretty easy. Because the edges are so tiny here, I'm just going to trim the corners off once I've turned them and get that flat down. Now I know I've kind of covered that corner. I'm just going to do the edges like that. And then I'm going to run my bone folder along the edge, or your card, whatever you might have that's accessible. Lay this against a nice hard surface and rub it down. Oopsie. Then I'm going to need to have one of those paper stubs that you use when you're wanting to smudge charcoal or pastels. If you don't have one of those, you could use a cotton bud or a Q-tip. And in fact, let me just get one out, because I know some of my viewers don't speak English. And that would help quite a lot. So you'll know that you've got wording here, but when you turn it over this side, you don't really actually see it very well. So you can either take your cotton bud and just rub over the top, and you already see that your writing is coming a little bit more prominent, or you could actually take your paper stub and do the same, because what it's happening is it's actually pushing the foil down, and then you're going to just work that ever so slightly with your paper stub. And the nice thing about these or the Q-tips is that it's not going to go through the foil because it's on a nice hard surface. So there are a few exceptions as to when I wouldn't use that. So you can see that that's quite nicely outlined, and if you wanted it to be more defined, you could take a ball tool like one of these that we use for Pergamano and some of the other paper crafts, and you could go over the lines just with this, which will give you, as you can see, a much more defined look to your letters or your numbers, whatever you're doing. But you do need to do the first part with the soft thing so that you can actually see where you're going. There we go. So that's nicely defined, and I will talk to you just now about how we're going to be able to color some of those. So let me just hold that up, and you can see, oopsie, that has come out rather nicely. So there are a few exceptions. If I was to perhaps do something like that, or perhaps if I was going to do a slide holder like that, I might be inclined in this instance to stick the foil onto the card and then die cut it so that I've got nice clean edges and I don't have to cut around the middle there and do all the holes, and certainly not around all of those. And then I would just have the raw card as the edge, but then I would probably ink up. So there are a couple of exceptions where I'd say it's not so easy just to stick the foil down and then turn it over. So I have a selection here of things that you could use. You could do a little frame like that. You could do more words. You could do numbers. And on this side here, I have already started with some of them, and I have done a little bit of coloring. So we've got some numbers, some words. I've got a little tab that I've done here, and I'm just going to show you now what you use to be able to color them. So remember, you've got to work out what your paints or your dyes or your inks can actually do. Quite a lot of products that we work with need to be absorbed into the surface of either cardboard or fabric to be able to bond nicely. This is a smooth, shiny surface, and it's not absorbent. So when you work with things like your distress sprays and your distressed oxides, they're going to want to spread all over the place. One of the easiest things to work with are your Sharpies, strangely enough, and I think most of us have access to them. They're alcohol based, so it's a bit like using your alcohol inks. And all we're going to do is make sure we've got some wet wipes to hand, and I also like to have one of these little makeup sponges, and then choose your color and color the whole thing in. And this can get a bit messy, so if you have lovely painted nails, then maybe you would like to wear some gloves, or if you don't like getting your hands dirty, wear some gloves. You're going to color this so that the color goes into those little grooves, and then while this is still fairly wet, you're going to try and rub some of this off so that you're getting a nice sort of soft tone to it. You don't want the whole thing black. And then I'm going to use my cotton bud just to simply wipe away some of the excess. The harder you rub over it, you'll see the more it's actually lifting. So I'll do one half of this design and you'll be able to see the contrast. If you have a look at that, you can see how nicely it's lifting the color up. This Sharpie actually looks quite purple, and strangely enough, but anyway, it is a black one. So you can take off or you can leave on as much as you like, but what it essentially does is in the little grooves creates a shadow. And I have done some other pieces here where I've used different colors. So that was a black, this one was what they call a gray, this was a brown, which was this brown over here, and this was a black, that was a brown, and the tab was done with the black as well. So you can go to town with these, and these are quite nice to make and just pop away in your stash. So these will now be used on other projects as and when I need it. So I'm going to work with this little one that says archive, and I've put some double-sided tape on the back, peeled off the first piece, and now I'm going to just grab the second piece, and I'm going to use this on the edge of my file folder here. I want to try and get that in the right spot and right up to the top if I can. There we go, so that when I have my little folder there, that it can say archive. I could also ink around the edges of that if I wanted to. So that is a really nice addition, and it just gives you a slightly different look to your work. My next idea is quite a cute little one. I've taken that little tab that I had that I'd inked up with the black Sharpie, and I've stuck it onto just a piece of foiled board, and then I've taken my distress ink, the walnut stain, and I've just gently rub this all over, and you'll see that it's taken away the shine on here, and it's also just made it look slightly more vintage. Now I'm going to just use one of these tracing wheels. These are just something that you'd get at the haberdashery store, and I'm just going to create a little bit of a border on my clipboard here. Roll that backwards and forwards, and you see it gives quite a nice edge to the border of the clipboard. Roll it backwards and forwards, and then I'm going to do this, yeah, I think I'm going to do it across the base as well, and I'm going to line up with that little dot and go to that other little dot and back, so that looks nice and neat, and I'm quite happy with that. Should I join it at the top? Yes, why not? So here you'll just have to be a little bit careful, and you could also have done this beforehand, before you put the tab on, should I say, but we'll just give it a couple of little dots to make it look the thing. So now I've got quite a nice, neat, elegant look to it, and I'm going to take my black soot distress ink pad, and I'm just going to gently edge around this. I'm not trying to make it terribly dark, I'm just trying to tie it up with the color of the Sharpie pen. Now the ink on here will take slightly longer than it will on paper to actually dry, so you're going to need to not want to fiddle with this for a little while. Just let it be, let it settle, and if in any doubt as to whether it's actually going to hold its color, you could quite easily just spray it with a little spritz of hairspray. That does wonders as a fixative. Alright, so therefore there I've got a nice little mini clipboard that I could use. I could put some papers on there if I wanted to, but that I think is quite a nice addition to a stash of ephemera, and I'm really happy with that one. Okay, let me move on to the next idea. Okay, the next one I'm going to do is to actually use this little label tab, and I'm going to mount it on a piece of what was rectangular card, and then I just used my corner rounder punch just to do those edges. But first I'm going to ink them up, and I'm going to use some black on the outside of the card, and I'm just using the ink pad as it is. Sorry, there's a bit of a thread there, just to ink up the edges. I just think the black and the silver go quite nicely together, and this is black soot I'm using. Right, and then I'm going to, first of all, on the little shiny bits of the metal foil here, I'm just going to drag my vintage photo, oh hang on, no, it's not vintage photo, this is walnut stain, just across it, and you'll see that it immediately just takes the shine off that, which will make it look old in itself. And then I'm going to use my black soot just to go around these edges. And the color is not going to be very strong, but that's okay, as long as it just gives a hint of a shadow. That's all I'm really looking for. Right, now I'm going to use my awl, or you could use a pokey tool, just to push through those little holes that were already in the die and that got covered by the metal foil like that. I'm going to position this onto my base, just getting that nicely in position, holding it firmly between my thumb and my finger and making sure my fingers aren't on the other side. I'm going to just push my awl through there, and I'm going to take a brad or a split pin, little black one in this case, just one of these mini ones, and just push this through and open it out on the other side. I just think that little bit of hardware gives a nice detail to it. I'm going to do the same on the other side. Just check your spacing here, and do make sure that your fingers are out of the way once you start to go through, because otherwise you'll get sore. Right, and then this will be a nice embellishment for any piece of ephemera I'm making, and I could put whatever wording or numbers I want on there just by stamping them onto a piece of paper. So there we go, nice little embellishment just made with some foil and some card. The next thing I was busy making was to make some tags. You can cut these out with a die, you can cut them out freehand. I've made myself a little template, so if I have strips of card, I can choose which corner I want. So that's a 1.5 centimeter in from this corner, that's a 1 centimeter in from this corner. I've got 0.5 centimeters, and for a bigger tag I've got 2.5. So for me, I just put that down and I would just trace around the edge like that, which makes it very easy. And I did a video on how to make these templates. If you'd like to have a look, I'll link that in the description. And then I've used my tracing wheel to go around the edge of that. I've got some nice soft string with a little bit of a shimmer in it, a little silver thread. And I'm just going to suggest that this could be a gift tag. You can cover this with a piece of paper and you can write on it. But also, if you have some embossing tools, and I'm talking about blind embossing tools, you could quite easily write into this metal foil and write your message onto the foil itself. So you are able to do your designs in the foil by using a ball tool. Okay, let's give that a little dot. And that's quite a nice easy way to make up Christmas and birthday cards that are fairly inexpensive. And you could color this if you wanted to. If you wanted to take some of the shimmer off, you can quite easily just use your walnut stain or vintage photo ink pad, and you'll see immediately that that just softens the whole look. So there we go, another idea for you. So this last idea is going to be for a cover that I'm going to do about the seashore, and I've stamped this little seabird with some shells onto some fabric. I want to just age this slightly in the background, so I'm going to use my little ink pad just to take away some of the shine of this foil. And I'm not doing it all over, I just like it to be a little bit mottled, because we have a lot of reflection on seashores when the water and the light bounce together, or the light bounces off the water. And I'm kind of going for that kind of feel. I'm not going to ink the edges because I don't want a dark edge at this stage of my planning, but if when time comes, if I wanted a dark edge, I could. And then I think what I'm going to do is to take some of my seashore stamps, of which I've got a few, and just carefully stamp a few little things around here. I just need to get a stamping block. So I feel on the foil itself I'd like some imagery, and possibly this one that's just the same repeat as that I might like to do. So stick it on the right side, girl. Makes life so much easier. So I'm just going to stick with black soot because I used black ink for my other ones. And in fact, if I'm actually being sensible, I should actually use a different ink altogether. So I'm going to just blot that off. Let me grab my other ink pad. I'm going to use the archival ink because it's waterproof and it's permanent. And I don't want this to smudge once I've done it. So I'm going to just ink up my stamp. And then kind of eyeball where I'm going to place this. So I'm going to use my cutting mat just to help me a little bit here. If I line that up with a line, align the lines, hey? And I put that here. It doesn't have to be completely centered. In fact, it's almost going to be better if it isn't. So if I do my seashells along this bottom edge, I think I'll be okay. It does slip and slide a little bit, and each image might be slightly different. So I'm just going with the flow, and I'm going to move it up and down and left to right a little bit so that it's not completely in the same spot. Yeah, I think I quite like that. Alright, so I'm going to leave that to dry, and then I'll stick that onto the base once it's completely dry.